Have you ever wondered that? What's the difference between faith and fantasy? Well, this is a time of year where this question is especially relevant, with competing images of Christ and Santa Claus everywhere we look, down every aisle. And I think many have wondered at one point or another where faith starts and fantasy ends, and vice versa. This is a season where both are so clearly on display and intermingled and intertwined to the point it's almost hard to separate them. And while fantasies like Santa Claus are clearly not based in faith, the fantasies of our imagination, when faith-based, often seed our realities. So it's not as if faith and fantasy are always separate or always different. They are the ideas, these ideas that we bring into being through our imagination when free of fear and doubt and walking hand in hand with God, that demonstrate the God within us and our faith in God. However, discerning where fantasy and imagination stop and where faith starts requires a great deal of help from our divinity and our higher self at times. One of my favorite explorations of the dynamic interplay between faith and fantasy happens in The Never-Ending Story. It's a fantasy novel that was written by Michael Ende and published in 1979. Many believe he was a student of the Theosophical Society, and they later turned that book into a movie that's beloved by many. It was put out in 1984. If you saw the movie, you might remember that this lead character, Bastian, he's this little boy, and he ends up with this big book from this magical bookstore. And unbeknownst to him at first, he's actually reading a book about his higher self, Atreyu. And as it turns out, Bastian is himself written into and participates in the process of creating the story. In literary studies, this is known as metafiction, where the narrative is taken to another level. And it's a very appropriate use in this case, since the view of alternate worlds and all possible worlds comes into play. This is significant because the film is based on a paradigm that's fixed on the idea of a multiverse that shows how all possibilities can be made actual. So Atreyu lives in the alternate world of Fantasia as a wild buffalo hunter on the plains people. And the film chronicles Bastian's progressive realization that the actual story is about him, while Atreyu is also on a journey of self-discovery to realize that he is also Bastian. And together, the two face many challenges throughout the book. So the first is the swamp, where if the sadness overtakes you, you sink. You sink into the swamp and you die. And Atreyu ends up losing his horse Artax there because Artax becomes overcome with fear and grief and sinks. The whole story is propelled by the threat of the nothing, the absence, the emptiness that's destroying the land of Fantasia. As in Greek, Jewish, Hindu, and many other philosophies, the concept of being or not being and the consequences of denying yourself is present, as the nothing is the opposite of the self, the true self. So in the story, Atreyu is the only one who can save Fantasia. Gmork, he's the ambassador of the nothing, a scary black wolf, and he knows this and is trying to hunt down Atreyu and kill him. And just about when Mork is about to catch Atreyu in the swamp, this luck dragon comes from the sky, Falkor, like an angel, and he saves him just in the nick of time from this scary black wolf and gets him to the Southern Oracle, where he's meant to go next to find out how to save Fantasia. So the concept of fear and self-worth are also present throughout this epic narrative. When Atreyu arrives at this first door of the Southern Oracle, he's confronted with these two giant Sphinx statues that their eyes open when somebody walks through the gate. And if you begin to doubt yourself as you walk through it, you get incinerated. They say that the Sphinxes can see straight into your heart and know what you really think of yourself. But Atreyu, in an act of extreme bravery, as this little boy, this little hunter, the plains people, manages to cross the threshold alive even after seeing the empty armor of a giant knight who went before him and failed. This message about believing in yourself is present in a lot of cultures throughout the world and is narrated in different ways. The courage to choose love over fear, the courage to believe, and the courage to live. After that, Atreyu arrives at the door of the mirror, and he has to face the greatest challenges of any human being, his confrontation with the true self. And that's where kind people discover that they're cruel, and the brave become cowards. When confronted with your true self, most people run away screaming, the story says. So psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan spoke of the mirror stage, in which we recognize ourselves in the mirror for the first time. And in this stage, we face a certain drama where the imaginary confronts the real. Also, the mirror symbolizes the concept of projection in psychology and the theories of reflections, because we're all conscious and unconscious mirrors and reflections of all. You project what you really are from what you are not and what you want to be. And when you project what you really are and what you're not and what you want to be, what you're really doing is just, seeing the realities of projection. Our reality is a projection from within. So Bastian must realize that he's Atreyu and vice versa. And this realization occurs at the magic mirror, when Atreyu and Bastian see each other reflected in the mirror. In standard Jungian lingo, this is common, right? This is the mirror of the psyche reflecting itself. And in other words, Bastian is supposed to realize these are manifestations of his psyche and then reintegrate them. As Sartre put it, human is the only being in nature who is not only as he wants to be, but also as he conceives himself after existing. Eventually, Atreyu must face the scary black wolf again, who explains to Atreyu that Fantasia is dying because humans have stopped believing, desiring, and dreaming. Gmort says, if people stop believing, their existence loses meaning and they're easy to control. And whoever has control has the power. And in that is so much meaning, because if our faith goes away and our existence loses meaning, then we as a people are easy to control by those who want the power. So humans' lack of faith is what created the nothing that destroyed Fantasia. People's failure to imagine, to dream, to create through fantasy is what created the nothing that eventually threatened to destroy Fantasia. And in the end, the great message of this great story is the importance of living up to who you really are, facing your fears, finding your true self, and never losing faith or imagination. And that's just it, isn't it? The biggest challenge of all, that's the enemy of faith. A lack of self-worth and a lack of imagination is what leads us to the negative thoughts and feelings that ultimately derail the best laid plans of our heart and our deepest desires. The author of The Never-Ending Story said, when we set a goal, the best way to achieve it is always to take the opposite path. To find reality, you have to do the same. Turn your back on it and go through the fantastic. However, there is also always a risk when you make such a journey between reality and fantasy. There's a subtle balance that should not be disturbed, because apart from the real, the fantastic also loses context. I've been thinking a lot lately about how every moment in your life is pregnant with all of these possibilities. Inside of every moment are multiple futures that can unfold. Inside this very moment right now are many conflicting outcomes. Do you ever get overwhelmed trying to figure out what's going to happen next in the movie of your life? I definitely do that. Try to step back and imagine where it might go based on all the present possibilities and permutations. And maybe based on personal or societal history or statistics or probability. And often, like in a movie, the foreshadowing is present for all of the possibilities, meaning that I will be able to look back one day once the final outcome is revealed and see the signs that showed me this one would happen. The signs for all of those potential outcomes are all present at the same time, unlike in a movie. So it's actually impossible to predict what will be based on foreshadowing. For example, I can imagine things working out the way I want. I can imagine them not working out the way I want. I can imagine them working out in a different way or not working out and then discovering, okay, that's actually what I did want, or that's better for me anyway. When you look back on this moment, what will the future reveal in that? You look back on this moment and see it was the beginning of something, the end of something, both. Will you see it's a continuation of a lifelong pattern or the breaking of one? It's so interesting to think many conflicting outcomes are present in this very moment right now for each and every one of us, and only time will reveal which outcome will be. Sometimes when I realize that, it can be a little scary. Sometimes scary to know that multiple outcomes are in front of me, but the future is not really up to me, not entirely. And it can make me feel so small and helpless at times. But the truth is, the future is partly and often largely up to us. Based on our faith, based on our thoughts, our feelings, our actions, we get to decide what we want to do next. Whether we want to keep going or switch paths, whether we want to commit to what we started or start over, whether we want to still have that outcome we thought we wanted or maybe have a different future in mind. We get to decide. And when you look back on this moment, you'll probably remember that the thoughts and feelings you had now, which will be back then in the future, that should have let you know it was coming, would probably assign meaning to the moments that ultimately revealed the outcome. You might say, oh, I knew this was going to happen, or I saw this coming, or why didn't I anticipate this outcome? But you might have said that regardless of the outcome, since every moment is pregnant with these countless possibilities, and within that moment exist all of the foreshadowings of what could happen next for any of the outcomes. Sometimes what happens next in our life seems to sneak up on us without warning. Why? Were we not paying attention? Were we in denial? Did we not have our head above water? Were we doing the ostrich thing with our head in the sand? Were we unaware of our deepest desire? Did we not listen to our thoughts and feelings? Did we not consider the free will of other people? Did we not consider God's will? And sometimes, tragically, those unwanted potentials that come to fruition, sometimes unexpectedly or sometimes with forewarning, can make us lose faith. We can start to lose faith in God and ourselves and others, and our ability to make good decisions, and our ability to be loved, and our ability to have other people treat us properly, and our ability to know and see the truth. It can lead us to wonder all of these things, whether what we believe to be true about ourselves, about life, about love, about God is just a fantasy. It can lead us to deny our self-worth, creating our own version of the nothing. And this is why it is so important for us to take charge of our thoughts and our feelings and our actions and our outcomes, to take responsibility for our thoughts and feelings and actions and outcomes, because this is how we demonstrate our faith. This is how we put our faith into action. As the Bible says, faith without works is dead. And what that tells us is that if we have faith in God and ourselves and others, in a situation, in a relationship, in a company, in a church, in anything, it's essentially meaningless. It's dead without the action to back it up, to prove it so, to show it so, to demonstrate that we believe it. As beloved Mother Mary said in volume 29, number 45 on November 6, 1983, realize therefore that the walk of God begins with the first step, and the first step is always faith. For how can you know where you're going or when you will arrive unless you get moving? You must begin that walk. Even if you have to turn right angles several times to finally get on the road and get right back on the right track. You cannot sit still and gather moss or dust, but you must be a sign of mobility in cosmos. A sign of the mobility in cosmos, for all the stars and galaxies are in motion around the central sun, and you are in motion yourself, in orbit around the divine reality of your being. At the end of the day, we all assign this meaning to the world and others from our own perspective, which is largely colored by our history, our traumas, our psychologies, our faith, our family, our work. And the meaning that others assign to the same situation is usually pretty different based on the same thing: their history, their traumas, their psychology, their faith, their family, their work. And this is why having faith and a direct connection to your divinity is so important. Because it's really the only window into a reality that's not colored by our human baggage or someone else's. It's the only way to discern fantasy from reality. It's important to realize in examining all this that we each have our own unique perspective on what's real, right? And what things mean to us. We all do. Just we need to keep in mind that what things mean to us don't always mean the same thing to other people. What a relationship means to us, probably not exactly what it means to the other person, or a friendship. What the other people mean to us or how we feel about them is usually not the same thing we mean to them or how they feel about us. What we think of them is probably not what they think of themselves, and what we think of ourselves is probably not what they think of us, and what their actions mean to us is probably not what they mean to them. Our actions, mean to us is, it's all so interesting. And that's, I think, why groupthink is so attractive, right? It gives us this false sense of security that our perspective is right. That's why we end up with all these factions and divisions in society, because we think, okay, if other people think and feel the same thing as us, that we can be more certain that our perception is reality. It's very reassuring until we break free from the group and realize once again the honest truth that no one actually sees anything the same way, and the idea that we do is an illusion, and no one has a better view or vantage point of reality than our divinity, the God within and without, who only sees unity. He doesn't see factions, doesn't see divisions. But realizing that can be kind of overwhelming sometimes for people to process and face, and so then they lean back on the known, the familiar, the accepted fantasy. They decide it's easier to just embrace Santa Claus than the Christ. Have you ever wondered how many people actually do share the same perspective, really? I don't know that any of us actually do. So we seek this comfort, right? Sharing the opinions of others, that we can create this comforting feeling of groupthink. Makes us feel we're not alone, our perspective is valid, not a fantasy, that we're in control. But the only thing we have control over in life is our own thoughts and feelings and actions. Can't control what other people will do. We can't control the effort they will put in or that they won't, or the courage that they have or that they don't, or the work ethic they have or don't, the motivation they have or don't, the amount of effort they want to put in or don't, the faith they have or don't, the fear or doubt they do or don't have, the love they do or don't have, the commitment they do or don't have. We have no control over that. What we can control or strive to control are our thoughts and feelings. Because our deepest desires, our deepest fears are often what create our outcomes. As Michael Ende says in The Never-Ending Story, Wishes cannot be summoned up or kept away at will. They come from deeper within us than good or bad intentions, and they spring up unannounced. So this is why it's so careful to watch what we're really desiring, what we're really thinking and feeling, and make sure it aligns with what we believe and what we want. Maybe you want something to work out. You really want it with all your being, but you're also really afraid it won't. Or you're really afraid to do it or take the steps that are required to get there. When you do that, you're secretly entering an arms race between your hopes and your fears. And whichever one you give the most energy to is most likely to win. It's the most likely outcome. For example, maybe you really want your career to go a certain way, but you're afraid it won't. If you give more attention to your fears that it won't work out than your dreams that it will, the more likely outcome is that it won't work out. Maybe you want a relationship to work out, but you're afraid it won't, or afraid if it does, that something else will go wrong or suffer, or you'll get hurt, someone will get hurt. If you give more attention to your fears than your dreams and your love, then the more likely outcome is that it won't work out. Or maybe you really want your finances to turn around, but you're afraid they won't, and you keep thinking and fretting about how it's not working and you don't know what to do. And if you give more attention to the fear that that won't turn around, then again, the more likely outcome is that it won't. So in the end, if something doesn't go as we hoped, we have to ask ourselves, did our fear of an unwanted outcome outweigh our desire for the wanted one? Did we ultimately create our worst nightmare on accident? Archangel Michael said in volume 13, number 35 on August 30, 1970, "How marvelous it is when the pathway of faith is suddenly revealed, even to the mind, as a mighty shimmering ribbon of light substance connecting the individual with his God presence. How delighted we are when invited to walk upon that ribbon right into the heart of the devotee and to assist him in the unfoldment of that graciousness of spirit that will create out of any environment those qualifications of the God flame that infuse the outer expression with the culture of the soul that is within. As St. Paul long ago said, where sin abounds, does grace not much more abound? Therefore, we know that the compartments of life that men have filled with the rubbish of doubt and confusion can be empty. And only when emptied can they be filled with true happiness and faith abounding everywhere." It's so beautiful. Therefore, we know that the compartments of life that men have filled with rubbish and doubt and confusion can be empty. And only when emptied can they be filled with true happiness and faith abounding everywhere. The truth is that perception often creates our reality. So we create the world we want or don't want, depending on our perceptions. So what Archangel Michael is telling us here is that once we empty ourselves of doubt and confusion and rubbish, we can be filled with true happiness and faith. And then our perception, which creates our reality, will be based on happiness and faith and hope, rather than doubt and confusion and rubbish. Too often we don't realize that our thoughts and feelings that are not based in faith and love and hope create this living hell for us, of our own making, that we created ourselves through fear and doubt and shame and blame, and then we blame God for the outcome that we ourselves created. And sometimes we lose faith. But did God do it? Did we do it ourselves with our own free will to think and feel and act as we want? As Archangel Michael says in volume 11, number 47, from November 24, 1968, "Blessed ones, ponder for a moment The fact that many unbelievers have had their faith destroyed in past and present embodiments, sometimes through disillusionment with misguided and misguiding religious leaders, and sometimes by the sudden impact of their own returning karma, unable to face the responsibility which truth brings. They have crossed the borderline into the domain of disdain for all that is religious and virtuous. And you say, what a tragedy. And we echo your sentiments. But we wish you to be alert to the problems of the unfortunate, even as you're aware of the glory of faith, so that the exuberance that you feel for the cause of righteousness will prompt you to invoke the light in such unity and intensity as to dispel the shadowed forms that have been cast upon the world by the unillumined. Then you can invoke our assistance in building reservoirs of light into which the ascended masters and angelic hosts will literally pour their transforming love and faith for the upliftment of all. When this love and faith are made tangibly manifest to the world through the activities of your lives, it will indeed be a united activity with angels and men and with nature herself, with the blessed devas who express your joy in the world around in blue skies and verdant hills and sparkling waterfalls and all of the glorious manifestations in nature. And the angelic hosts will come in with great tides of spiritual feeling, the tangible power of God, to produce the golden age miracles that are forthcoming. And men who are today without faith, who have been shuttled across the border into the realm of darkness, hatred, and mistrust, will be caught up in the joy and glory of that faith, which is the goodness of God in every man. I think it's important to remember here as we reflect on this that even with the careful monitoring and steering of our own thoughts and feelings and actions and faith and action, we're never guaranteed a final wanted outcome, right? It's because it's up to God and other people who also have free will and all of their own thoughts and feelings and desires and actions. And that's where faith, once again, is vital. Faith looks like being at peace with any outcome and giving God praise for whatever outcome that is. As the author of the Never-Ending Story wrote, you must let what happens happen. Everything must be equal in your eyes, good and evil, beautiful and ugly, foolish and wise. So maybe the thing you thought you wanted to happen wouldn't actually make you happy, but only God knows that. Maybe God blocks it instead of blessing it, and you are in despair, thinking he doesn't love you or listen to your prayers, not realizing he just protected you from an oncoming disaster. You'll never be the wiser. Maybe one relationship falls apart so you can meet your twin flame or another soulmate who will help you heal parts of yourself that would have otherwise remained unhealed and stagnant in this lifetime. Maybe your company falls apart so you can do something more meaningful and fulfilling. Maybe the project you started fails so you can pursue different projects that answer your true calling and dharma. We never really know what God saved us from, but we've all made assumptions, at least I think I have, about what he didn't give us. And at times felt despair and despondent that we didn't get what we wanted, that we thought we needed, that we thought we deserved, and maybe, however fleetingly, we blame God for it. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't consider our role in it or our responsibility for the outcome. And it definitely doesn't give God praise for protecting us for potential harm that we never would have seen coming and never knew would happen. And so faith is actually believing that what happens next is the best thing for you, either to learn a lesson, to help you grow, to fulfill your dharma. Faith is embracing hope and love and taking bold actions that demonstrate it. As Falkor the Luck Dragon says to Atreyu, everything will turn out all right, you'll see. I can't imagine how, said Atreyu. Neither can I, said the luck dragon. That's the best part of it. And the mystery of not knowing but trusting that God knows best, is faith. It's not fantasy. It's important to note here that there's also a falsehood buried in letting go and letting God, as they say. So sometimes we can overdo this, right? We can accept we're not in control. It's easy to get lost in that feeling that we don't have control of tomorrow. Anything can happen. Therefore, at the whim of circumstances and situations and other people or God and the universe. And we can start to feel like we should just live for today, not worry about tomorrow, not plan for the future, because we never know when we'll take our last breath. And we're just at the mercy of the sea of life that we're lost in. If we do that to an extreme, the problem is that we stop seeding the future with our faith, with our thoughts, with our feelings, our actions that may bring about the future that we wanted for ourselves, or that God wanted for us, or that wants for us. We may even stop doing the things that demonstrate our faith is alive and well. And then never-ending story, Bastian says to Groggerman, the lion, what do you suppose it means, do what you wish? That must mean I can do anything I feel like, don't you think so? All at once, Groggerman's face looked alarmingly grave and his eyes glowed. No, he said in a deep, rumbling voice. It means that you must do what you really want and truly want, and nothing is more difficult. It's your own deepest secret, and you don't know it. How can I find out? Atreyu said. By going the way of your wishes from one to another, from first to last, it will take you to what you really and truly want. That doesn't sound so hard, said Bastian. It's the most dangerous of all journeys. Why? I'm not afraid. That isn't it, Groggerman rumbled. It requires the greatest honesty and vigilance, because there's no other journey on which it's so easy to lose yourself forever. So we see that the interplay between desires and wishes and thoughts and feelings and imagination and faith are like this beautiful dance filled with all these dancers that are working together harmoniously in concert. And sometimes imagination and fantasy can actually be the result of faith. It can also be how we put that faith into action. And other times, fantasy can lead us astray when it's based in unreality and fear and disbelief, a desire to hide from the truth, or a desire to sidestep our responsibilities or God's will. Our minds and hearts and desires are incredibly powerful when they focus on something exclusively, without doubt or fear clouding the way. I always marvel at entrepreneurs who create these companies out of thin air. They do it from this place of fantasy and vision. They show us that everything we create is a combination of imagination and hard work. They have this idea they believe so fervently that nothing can take them off track. No one can tell them that they're wrong. And that single-minded desire without any fear to derail it or too much fear to derail it eventually creates their reality. And their perception becomes true. Sometimes they aren't even great or even decent human beings, let alone working with their divinity to achieve what they set out to do. What that shows us is that there's an enormous power and potential inside each of us. If we can apply that same level of commitment, that steadfast commitment to our vision, and that faith and work in our perceptions and desires, and if we work with our divinity to do it, nothing can stop us. We can do anything. The truth is, we can do whatever we believe we can do if God blesses it. If we believe we could stop a storm more than we doubt it, we can stop that storm. We can part those storm clouds. If we believe we can walk on water more than we doubt ourselves, more than we doubt God, we can walk on the water. If we believe we can heal the sick more than we doubt it, we can heal people. Like Mark Prophet, if we believe we can drive through a mountain, we can do it. We just need the faith the size of a mustard seed, and doubt smaller than that, since our faith must be bigger than our doubt. So that's essentially a minuscule amount of doubt and fear and only a tiny amount of faith. It sounds easy. It's obviously harder said than done, or harder done than said. But at the end of the day, we're really only limited by our beliefs, right? Our faith in God and our faith in God in us, which most often manifests as a lack of self-worth. As Khalil Gibran says in On Pain, much of your pain is self-chosen. It is the bitter potion by which the physician within you heals your sick self. Therefore, trust the physician and drink his remedy in silence and tranquility, for his hand, though heavy and hard, is guided by the tender hand of the unseen. And the cup he brings, though it burns your lips, has been fashioned of the clay which the potter has moistened with his own sacred tears. But to love yourself and know your truth worth as God does, that's when you no longer need to drink that bitter potion of your own making. That's the key to unlocking the potentials you want and that God wants for you without letting your fear or shame or blame sabotage them. That's the key to creating the world you want to live in, your own fantasia, and making sure that it's safe from the nothing. I'd like to close out today's message with a really beautiful passage from Archangel Michael in volume 13, number 47, from November 22nd, 1970. It really outlines so masterfully how faith is not fantasy, and that true faith is often achieved through questioning and testing. Why is negation in the world, beloved ones? After all, thought and feeling are divine gifts, and whether or not they are misused or properly used, they do accumulate. Let all understand then that the accumulation of doubt is a faith of sorts, a faith that is conditioned by and subject to the need for verification. And this attitude is not without merit. In fact, in a world where deceit is prevalent, it is necessary for survival. The real challenge of life, however, is the full realization that if a quality be of the light, it will withstand the testing of life. Once this is understood, life is emptied of negation. And through a recognition of the purpose of the challenge, the man is at last strengthened in his faith, not unrighteously, but rightly so. I would say that the students would understand this, whereas some have gloried in what they have called their faith, they have not always been able to accept the idea that those who possess doubts actually have a form of faith that must of necessity subject all things to a thorough analysis, to the challenges of reality and the testing of life. We do not eschew this type of faith. We enhance the understanding of it by divine decree. It is not the will of God that life should rightly challenge itself in order that understanding might be refined and the proper faith be built upon a foundation of higher knowledge. We do not condemn those who carefully examine the teaching before placing their energies wholeheartedly behind the cause which we long ago espoused. For we know that those who are convinced because they have proven the law for themselves are far more dependable than those who, having been convinced against their will, are of the same opinion, or who, believing blindly, will not be able to withstand the haughty arguments of the tempter. Now, faith that is born of understanding is the strongest of all types of faith. For once it is satisfied that a condition is indeed correct, it can, without reserve, place itself in the service of light. Therefore, even the doubting of Thomas was understood by the Master, who said, "Because thou hast seen me, thou hast believed." But he also said, "Blessed are they that have not seen and yet have believed." Thus Jesus blessed both types of faith, recognizing one as an activity of the mind and the other as coming from the heart. Some individuals are more ready to accept the gifts of the Spirit than others. They're not burdened by the things of the flesh. The world is not a stumbling block to their faith. Rather, all of the glories of nature remind them of the things not seen to which they have tethered their trust. It's natural for them to believe in the existence of God and nearness of divine identities. Therefore, their consciousness is like a funnel through which the universe of invisible becomes visible to those who have less realization of the higher world and consequently less faith in its eminent reality. I'm concerned with them. I am also concerned with those who recognize the need for scientific investigation. I do not rebuke their challenge. I answer it, proving all things in the fullness of time. If they will bear with me as I unfold the mysteries of cosmos from the heights of that all-embracing faith which God has charged me to bear on behalf of his children. Men have created various dogmas, both religious and political. They've said we're of this order, we're of that order, we're of this persuasion, or we're of that persuasion. The division of humanity's thought into feelings that support one system of truth to the exclusion of all others is not at all productive of oneness. No. True oneness is God intended for his children. A oneness that is superimposed upon groups of people without their realization of union with the Father and the Son, without their faith in the wholeness of the body of God, can produce only a very limited manifestation, only that one that is incapable of holding the beauty of the cosmic concepts from within, but exhibits only an outer amalgamation of distorted views. So let the practical identification of faith then be understood. Faith is an activating force within the souls of men. It is a flame that may whirl as a giant deflector, consuming the shabbiness of the mortal view, or it may leap as lightning, breaking the rocks of opposition that are continually thrown in the disciples' pathway. What a density of fear man has drawn forth with his creative power. What a density of fear man has drawn forth with his creative power. Let him know that the same creative affluence can be lavished upon the higher density. If he wills it, the future can indeed bring forth the creation of a density of faith, which in reality will be a buoyancy of faith, the joy of realization that faith is indeed the substance of all things hoped for, and the evidence of that which is not seen. Let all understand that the spiritual potential of man is far greater than any phase of his present realization, that he is the repository of both time and eternity, and that when rightly understood, faith, as Archimedes' lever, can move the world into the golden age where every man shall be a God-free being, releasing his creativity everywhere to the joy of his creator. Would you join me now, giving thanks to Archangel Michael for this teaching? Oh, beloved Archangel Michael, thank you for being with us today. Thank you for cutting us free of any places where faith was not full, could be fuller. Thank you for helping us take from this teaching what we can to be a better reflection of Christ. This Christmas season, show us how to put our faith into action that is so visible and so palpable that we embolden the faith of every man we meet. but especially those who might need a hand up or a better living example of Christ than they previously had, for those who have been hurt by previous religious leaders and previous embodiments or this one and have lost their faith. Oh God, let us be their light that shows them. Let us be your light that shows them that Christ is born. Christ is alive and real and living in us and them today. We ask for this to be done according to God's holy will, and let it be done. Amen.